This week, John McManus, president of the John Birch Society, delivered a lecture at the American University here in Washington, D.C. He used the occasion to talk about a number of issues and to offer his views of President Clinton's economic recovery package. The John Birch Society was founded back in 1958 as a citizens group opposed to the forces of big government, internationalism, and tyranny. Coming next on C-SPAN 2, we'll bring you coverage of John McManus's remarks.
On behalf of the School of International Services Graduate Student Council, welcome to the Griffith Lecture Series. My name is Doug Grain, and I'm director of the Griffith Lectures. We are very fortunate to have with us tonight Mr. John F. McManus, president of the John Birch Society. I have asked Mr. McManus to discuss with us his views on a number of topics which include the Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the United Nations, socialism, the New World Order, and President Bill Clinton. The format for tonight's lecture is as follows: a presentation by Mr. McManus to last approximately 45 minutes, followed by a question and answer period of equal duration. After the lecture, an informal dinner will be hosted in honor of Mr. McManus at Quigley's, just down the street, and all are welcome. Mr. McManus first joined the John Birch Society as a field coordinator in New England in 1966. In 1973, he was named the organization's public relations director and worked very closely with the Society's founder, Robert Welch, until his death in 1985. As the Society's chief media representative throughout the United States, he has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs. For years, he has been one of the Society's few authorized spokesmen. In addition to other responsibilities, he has authored numerous articles for John Birch Society-affiliated publications. His weekly Birch Log columns have provided unique insight into the affairs of our nation since 1973. He is publisher of the New American Magazine, a biweekly journal of news and commentary. His first book, An Overview of Our World, written in 1971, analyzed the possible conspiracy against mankind and its harmful effects on contemporary civilization. His most recent book, The Insiders, Architects of the New World Order, was published in the fall of 1992. Mr. McManus was named president of the Society in June 1991. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1935, he graduated in 1957 with a Bachelor of Science degree in physics from Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts. At graduation, he received a commission as a lieutenant, United States Marine Corps, and served on active duty for 3 years. The father of 4 children and the grandfather of many, Mr. McManus is married to the former Mary Helen O'Reilly of Boston. And so, at a time when some in this town have chosen to define patriotism with paying higher taxes, I am pleased to present to you someone who many consider a patriot in the traditional sense of the term, Mr. John McManus.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the time of anyone coming out to hear what we have to say, and I went and grabbed the wrong folder right to start. I also appreciate anybody who, when introducing me, will play it straight, because I've had a lot of interesting things happen to me as I've been introduced over the years. I remember one time being introduced by a fellow who said, "You've heard of the rambling wreck from Georgia Tech, here's the total loss from Holy Cross." You know? And another time a fellow said that he'd gone to the airport to pick me up, and he says, "You should have seen his plane, it had 2 right wings." You know? So a lot of interesting things can happen, and Doug, I appreciate you playing it straight, as we say. I also like to start off any talk I give with a story, and I have a story about 2 duck hunters. And the point of the story, I'll tell you right at the beginning, is that there are differing points of view. Not that all points of view have merit, but there are differing points of view. So these two duck hunters decided to go out and shoot some ducks, and one of them brought along a brand new dog. Well, they're out there, and the ducks fly over, and bang, they shoot the duck, and the new dog walked out on the water, grabbed the duck, and walked back on the top of the water. Well, the other fellow looked at it. He was about to ask him about it. More ducks flew over, same thing. They shot the duck. The dog walked out on the water, grabbed the duck, and walked back. So the fellow who owned the dog turned to his friend, and he said, "Hey," he said, "did you notice anything different about my dog?" And he said, "Yeah, he can't swim." Now, that's a different point of view. All right? Not all points of view are legitimate. Some of them are dead wrong. Some of them, of course, are incomplete. And many points of view are worth defending, even if no one wants to defend them. Now, we live at a time when the world is supposedly changing. We live at a time when people tell me, as I travel through the country, especially when I'm appearing on radio talk shows, somebody will say, "Well, communism is dead now. What's the John Birch Society doing? Ha, ha, ha." And, of course, our point of view is that communism still exists in China and in Cuba and in North Korea and in Berkeley, California, and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and a few other places. But the John Birch Society has always been just as opposed to any form of totalitarianism. We call it collectivism, and it could be called socialism. So we've been opposed to communism and socialism and Nazism and fascism and princes, potentates, dictators, and kings right from day one. And day one was December 9, 1958. Now, it's true that we became known as an anti-communist organization because we were opposed to communism. But we were also opposed to a lot more than just communism. Now, over the years, I've had numerous instances where I've been explained, I have been introduced as a leader of an anti-communist organization to an individual here or there, and especially if it was a professor. And I'll find the professor saying to me, "Well," he said, "I know all about communism. Communism is dialectical materialism." Now, maybe some of you people have heard that term. And he says, dialectical materialism, of course, means that there's a thesis and there's an antithesis. You throw both of them out, you end up with a synthesis, and that's dialectical materialism. See, I know all about communism, and I don't need the John Birch Society. Well, the truth of the matter is the person who was saying that had no idea what he was saying. He was regurgitating something he'd read in a textbook. But I contend that dialectical materialism, one of the great promoters of it being Karl Marx, is being practiced on the American people all the time. And I'm especially anxious to talk about it with young people in a college atmosphere because it is so very important. Now, dialectical materialism starts off, as the professor would tell me, it starts off by saying that there is a thesis and there's also an antithesis, which is direct opposite of the thesis. And you should discard both of those, and you should end up with a synthesis. You should get in the middle of the road, in other words. And never forget that if you're in the middle of the road, you get hit by traffic going both ways. Right. So what does that accomplish? If you allow dialectical materialism, haven't you thrown out the absolutes? Haven't you said that truth is not to be defended? Haven't you said that falsehood is not to be opposed? Haven't you thrown both of those out and gotten into what we could call the fuzzy middle? You certainly have. But, ladies and gentlemen, there are absolutes. There are things that are absolutely true and will always be true. There are things that are absolutely false and will always be false. Now, if you defend that position way out here, you defend the truth, you may very well be labeled an extremist, which has happened, of course, to the John Birch Society. But if you are defending truth, you can't go beyond that. You are, if you defend truth and stand for it and don't bend and don't yield, you are at the extreme end of the philosophical panorama. And so if somebody calls you an extremist for defending truth take it as a compliment. If, on the other hand, you say that this is false, and it's always been false, and I intend to continue to insist that it's false, you may be called an extremist for that point of view. Now, where did all of this come from? Where did this dialectical materialism come from? Well, it came from the skewered philosophy of Kant and Hegel, and finally into Karl Marx. And it is being used in America. You are not supposed to have a very strong position for or against. You're supposed to compromise. And don't we in our country today look to politicians who cover themselves with all kinds of self-adulation by telling everybody that politics is the art of compromise? To which I say, blah. The art of compromise. What's wrong with standing for a principle? What's wrong with standing for a truth? What's wrong with opposing what's false? We have, in addition to the political world, we have situation ethics today. We have people saying it's not whether it's right or wrong, it depends on the situation, which means it may be right or it may be wrong, and it depends on the situation. And if you allow yourself to get caught up into that, then you don't have any absolutes. You can always make the case that your situation allows this kind of conduct and allows this kind of attitude. In fact, there was a book years ago written by a man named Joseph Fletcher, Reverend Joseph Fletcher, at the Episcopal Theological Seminary in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He was teaching young people to be Episcopal priests, Episcopal ministers. And he wrote a book called Situation Ethics. And he was a great defender of that attitude. It's also interesting to know that Reverend Joseph Fletcher was identified as a member of the local Communist Party before government agencies and sworn testimony. The John Birch Society believes that truth is worth defending and falsehood should be opposed. If we have any kind of a motto amongst us, it's simply this: right is right even if no one says it's right. And I don't mean right wing. I mean correct, truth. Now, we defend, in our country, we defend the founders, we defend what they gave us, and we're very anxious to continue to do that and to bring to the attention of many Americans some of the truths about what how our nation began and why, many of them somewhat fuzzily known and many of them never even considered by an awful lot of people. So, in order to do that, we go right back to the beginning. We are opposed, as I mentioned, to communism and socialism and fascism and Nazism and all of those things, but we are for Americanism. And Americanism has a definition, and it's not something that the John Birch Society devised. Americanism was defined when our nation began. Americanism was defined in the Declaration of Independence. And I'm reaching for a copy of it here. Again, I've got the wrong folder. Here it is. The Declaration of Independence, we have a little booklet that contains the Declaration and the Constitution. The core of our nation is a small phrase at the beginning of the Declaration. A self-evident truth is what they called it, where they said men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Stop right there. That is the fundamental premise upon which this nation is built. It says that there is a God and that our rights come from God, not from government. Very important. It never happened before. There's never been a nation start with that kind of a foundation. So they went on in the very next breath to define the proper role of government. They said to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. In other words, God is on top, individuals next, with rights that had come from God. And then the people who have rights form a government for the purpose of protecting those rights, and that's all. Not to redistribute the wealth, not to be social engineers, not to do anything other than protect their rights, and protect them mostly from the government that they had created in the first place. Well, the Constitution of the United States then came along. We fought a war to keep the Declaration of Independence in place. we won the war. They got together in 1787 and they decided to scrap the Articles of Confederation. They built a whole new governmental system called the Constitution of the United States. To limit you and me? No, to limit government. Strictly defined powers of government, checks and balances, diffusion of powers, separation of powers, everything they could possibly think of to have government properly empowered and no more. And then they added to it a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights doesn't say that government gives you the right to speak and the right to practice your religion and the right to keep and bear arms, does it? No. It says Congress can't take it away. Congress shall not. Congress shall not. Congress shall not. The federal government shall have nothing to say about our rights. The rights transcend any power of government which is down here, and government shall not interfere. You can see immediately how far we have departed from that. Government now has practically everything to say. And if you wanted to teach the concepts that I've just given you in a government school in our country today, you teach that rights come from God, that there is a God, you'll be dragged before the principal or before some school board, and maybe even before the Supreme Court. You can't teach that in a government school today. So you ask most Americans today, where do you get your rights? If you get any answer at all, many will say to you, from government. And if a government gives you your rights, then a government can properly take them away. And that's what's happening to us. And so our nation began with limited government. If the John Birch Society is for anything, it's for limited government, not no government. The proper amount of government makes us more free. We don't have to stand by our property. We don't have to defend it. We don't have to wear a bandolier of ammunition and carry a machine gun. We've hired a government to do that for us. But we don't want the government to do any more than that. And if you got back to the Constitution of the United States today, the government of the United States would be 20% its size, 20% its cost, and wouldn't that be wonderful? So with limited government, the people were free, unleashed great productivity in an atmosphere of freedom and also an atmosphere of responsibility. Responsibility makes better men and better women. Limited government keeps you free. But our government today, our country today, is slowing down, isn't it? We have many, many Americans who have become dependent on government. We have all kinds of attitudes being shaped that say that government should do this and government should do that. And people begin to think that every problem that they can possibly conceive of should be started by government. And if they were careful enough and looked hard enough into those situations, almost every problem that the government has tried to solve, it has made worse. The problem has gotten worse. The cost has gotten enormous. The controls over everyone have grown. And history is full of that kind of thing happen. It wasn't to happen here. We've departed from the principles of Americanism. It's time that we got back to them. And of course, we're not going to get back to them until many Americans who haven't got the foggiest idea of what this country is all about begin to appreciate them. Now, history is full of arrogant individuals who maintained over the course of the ages that everyone would be better off if they were led by me. Arrogant individuals who said it sometimes and who, if they didn't say it, acted that way, amassed power unto themselves, the kings, the dictators, the this, the that, all throughout the history. And that mentality leads to tyranny. And those individuals always gravitated to government. Government is where the action is, according to them. Political power becomes absolute only when government administers it. The John Birch Society contends that the United States is on that slide. We are on that slide where arrogant individuals are telling us that everybody would be better off if we just simply let them take over. Let them do what they want. Let them tax us, control us, regulate us, dictate to us, tell us what to think, on and on and on. We contend that our country is on the slide that leads to tyranny, and that there are individuals within our nation who want to govern everyone, even tyrannically if necessary. They will tell you that they mean to govern well, but never forget that they mean to govern. You can tell a person sometimes by the company he keeps. You can tell a person by the organizations that they belong to. You can tell them by the actions that are taken. You can't usually tell much by what they say, although sometimes you can that as well. That can be helpful. Now, we've passed out a flyer to most of you here, a thing called It's Still the Same Old Story, and it details the, I think I have one here. It details the fact that President Clinton told us he was going to give us change, and it's still the same old story. May I have one, please? All right, thank you. I thought I had one handy. It's just a short little flyer. President Clinton promised change, but it's still the same old story. Insiders from the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission continue to dominate the United States government. They have dominated it through the Nixon administration, the Ford administration, the Carter administration, the Reagan administration, the Bush administration, and so on down the road. Now, we'll talk about those, but it's also interesting to note that Mr. Clinton promised us change and has given us another whole series of lawyers who are now in positions, another whole series of millionaires, another whole series of people who are political change agents for their own point of view, and that's not really change. That is what has come before, and that is where we are again with the Clinton administration. So we want to talk a little bit about the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. Let's start off by saying that the Council on Foreign Relations was begun in 1921 by New World Order internationalists led by a self-professed Marxist named Edward Mandell House. House was President Wilson's chief advisor. He had written a book in 1912 wherein he said he was working for socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. Very interesting book called Philip Drew, Administrator. The Council on Foreign Relations has always sought economic control of the people through socialism and political control of the people through world government. And those are the twin elements of the New World Order: political control, economic control. There are 2,905 members, all United States citizens, in the Council on Foreign Relations. I have the latest copy of their annual report here, and as you can see, the membership is given in the back. They break down their membership into which categories of American life they dominate. The 2,900, they say 387 of them are U.S. government officials. Another 300 are communications experts of the media, not only just media personalities, but corporate executives in the media world. They tell us that academic scholars, 607, nonprofit institutions, administrators, 563. Only 2,900 persons, 387 of whom are admitted by the Council itself as United States government officials. If nothing else, it should be known. It is not generally known. Now, we also talk about the Trilateral Commission, where the Council on Foreign Relations was started in 1921. The Trilateral Commission was started by Council on Foreign Relations people in 1973, chiefly David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. The organization, in fact, came out of a book written by Brzezinski in 1970, a book called Between Two Ages. And that organization seeks the New World Order, and it concentrates on forging economic union as the path to political union. Try to remember that economic union always precedes political union. And if you mean to establish a world government, then you can form economic unions that lead to political unions here and there, like the European Community and the North American Free Trade thing, and some other unions that are being proposed in Asia and even in Latin America and so forth. And you want to convert those economic unions into political unions. Then if you do that, then it's a lot easier to go from there into world government and just simply have a few political unions join your world government instead of 175 individual nations. Is that what they're after? I contend that yes, that's exactly what they're trying to accomplish. The Trilateral Commission only has about 300 members. And the 300 members are 1/3 from Western Europe, 1/3 from North America, that includes Canada, and 1/3 from Japan. There are no others outside of those areas in this Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission, almost all of those who are U.S. citizens who are members of the Trilateral Commission are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. So here we have two very important organizations, and lo and behold, President Bill Clinton happens to be a member of both. And George Bush, who preceded him, was a member of both until 1979, when he stepped aside in order to try and present himself as a conservative, independent-thinking American. He has since spoken at their meetings and let it be known that he's still very much with these organizations, even though he's not formally a member. Now, my little flyer says it's still the same old story, and you can see here that we now have the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, the head of the CIA, and several undersecretaries. And these were the initial appointments of Mr. Clinton. They are all members of the Council on Foreign Relations, and about half of them are also members of the Trilateral Commission. Since that time, since that flyer has been produced by our people at our headquarters in Appleton, Wisconsin, we have seen that Mr. Clinton has appointed a whole bunch more. In fact, there was one day a news clipping came out, and he appointed 5 new assistant secretaries of state or deputy secretaries of state. Among them, a man named Paul Tarnoff, and Paul Tarnoff is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. He's now an assistant secretary of state. And another one was Winston Lord, who was a former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's now an assistant secretary of state. And another one was Strobe Talbott from Time magazine. Strobe Talbott is the roommate of Bill Clinton at the Rhodes Scholar Program in England, and he's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he's been appointed to a new post within the State Department to administer the funding and the sending of foreign aid to the nations of Eastern Europe who used to be part of the communist bloc. Now, Mr. Clinton has made it very clear he intends to cut back on the deficit. He intends to cut government spending. Well, the John Birch Society is a wonderful suggestion. Stop all foreign aid. But what he has done is appointed this high-powered individual to a new post to shovel more money at former communists and socialists who still run those nations. And we're not going to get cuts in the deficit, my friends. We're going to get increases in the deficit. Now, this little flyer that we have advertises this little book I wrote called The Insiders. And this is about the Carter years and the Reagan years and the Bush years. I haven't written yet about the Clinton years.